Well, first of all, would have been Milton Friedman's 100th birthday. So here's to Milton. And as Amanda pointed out, he apologized later in life, and I'm sure that I will have some things to apologize for later in life. So we have that in common, if nothing else. Here to talk about the war on drugs, and specifically Milton Friedman's position on the war of drugs. So first let me say, drugs are bad, okay? All right? Let's just get that out of the way. Drugs are bad, okay? All right. I'm not pro-drug use, and neither was Milton. Drugs are bad for you. At least the drugs that are currently illegal, most of them, methamphetamine, bad for you. Heroin, bad for you. All right? That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not a big government is worse than drugs are bad for you. And it was Milton's position in mind that a big government is worse than drugs are for you. And it's because we're anti-drug use, or Milton was anti-drug use, that he was against prohibition. Now, I've put together a series of quotes on Milton's through here in his honor. Milton said in this regard about why he was in favor of stopping the criminalization of different drugs, or all drugs. He said, prohibition is an attempted cure that makes matters worse for both the addict and the rest of us. And I think if we really look into it and think about it, that's absolutely true. What I like to say is that the drug war is just another failed big government program. And as conservatives, that's what we rail against, right? Well, technically, I'm a libertarian, but we're close enough on that. Libertarians, people that believe in limited government, are supposed to decry failed big government programs. Yet the war on drugs, which is traditionally a conservative battle, they're actually arguing for continued failed big government program. Milton saw that was not the correct way to go. It was inconsistent with that belief. And along with some other conservative icons like William Buckley, he also saw that. Look at all the government jobs that are created by the drug war. I mean, just think about it. You've got the local police, you've got the county sheriffs, you've got state police, you've got the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, you've even got the Coast Guard, you've got federal prosecutors, county prosecutors, you've got judges at every level. It goes on and on. So, why, despite basically a 40-year record of abject failure, do we still have people in the government that are 100% gung-ho about the drug war? Well, I'm going to quote Upton Sinclair this time. The reason that is, and quote, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon not understanding it." Now, to be fair, not all law enforcement are drug wars. They're not all comprised of drug wars. There's a great organization called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is LEAP for short, and they all are law enforcement officers that have seen the waste, not only of taxpayer money, but of police resources that go into the war on drugs that otherwise could be spent on doing things like catching people that may murder and steal. So it is a growing movement, I think it's still growing, and I think LEAP is an important part of that. Friedman explicitly said on this issue, "I'm in favor of legalizing drugs. According to my value system, if people want to kill themselves, they have every right to do so. Most of the harm that comes from drugs is because they are illegal." And that goes back to the original comment about how government makes the problem worse. And Milton had a famous comment, not particularly about drugs, but about government in general, when he said, quote, "If you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years, there'd be a shortage of sand." Now, conversely, let's apply that to the war on drugs. If you put the government in charge of ending the drug trade, in 5 years, they'll be selling it in schoolyards and the profits will go up. Which is exactly what happens. And again, quoting Milton, since this is his birthday, he said, "The government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem." Again, he's nailing it, and not just on the drug war specifically, but on government in general. Now, one thing I think a lot of people don't grasp is that markets, free markets, or markets in general, whether or not it's free or not, the market forces are real. They're just as real as physics. They're just as real as gravity. I mean, you could say, hey, gravity's dangerous. You know, how many people die every year from falling down or falling off a cliff? No, it's dangerous.
Let's make it illegal.
Exactly, let's make it illegal. Exactly. And that, of course, is absurd, right? We know that. Well, trying to outlaw a market, you're going to get the same result. You're going to spend a lot of money trying to enforce it, and you're not going to stop it. And you probably won't make gravity worse, so it's even worse to try to stop the free market, because now you are creating a black market. And who's attracted to the black market? Criminals. Now, we had prohibition back when Al Capone was ruling Chicago, and everybody knows all the movies, all the history about gangsters shooting it out over turf for who could sell their illegal alcohol. We have that now, of course, with the drug wars in Mexico with the cartels, and they've taken it to a whole new level, obviously. You've also got battles over turf in Los Angeles over drug gangs, New York, Chicago, wherever there's the drug trade. I represented a person who was accused of being involved in a cocaine conspiracy, crack cocaine, in rural North Carolina. I mean, it is everywhere. But since the end of alcohol prohibition, and on that note, do we see Adolf Coors and Anheuser-Busch having shootouts over territory anymore? No, we don't, because it's now a legitimate business where people that are legitimate businessmen aren't going to risk going to jail over a product they can sell legally. There's a market for it. They just compete for that market. When you don't care if you kill people, you're not going to care if you're selling drugs to kids. And that's part of the problem. Milton said about the black market, he said the black market was a way of getting around government controls. It was a way of enabling the free market to work. It was a way of opening up, enabling people. Now he went on to say, well, people will say, hey, Dave, or in this case, Milton, hey Milton, what about all the addicts we're gonna get? We're gonna have more addicts now. If you legalize it, everybody in this room is gonna run out and try some meth, right? Well, that's the argument, or a percentage of you will. Anyway, right. There's always at least one that admits it, absolutely. So in regard to that argument, Milton looked to economics. Economics provides an answer to this, to that perceived problem. And he said, many drug addicts are deliberately made by pushers who give likely prospects their first few doses free. It pays the pusher to do so, because once hooked, the addict is a captive customer. If drugs were legally available, any possible profit from such inhumane activity would disappear, since the addict could buy from the cheapest source. And let that sink in, because the drug warriors always, the argument is, everybody else will be on drugs. The addicts will go up. Well, by making it illegal, we have created a perverse incentive to find new customers, to go to a schoolyard and give samples away, to give teenagers their first hit free. Now, has anybody ever seen Jack Daniels in front of a middle school giving out shots? No. They don't do that because they have a legitimate business, and they're not going to risk any type of jail or legal problems by doing something like that. So we have to look at, despite our intentions, we have to look at the results. Milton also said, again, this was just a general quotation, not specific to the war on drugs, but it applies. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. And this again goes back to what I think is this false conservative, liberal, left-right dichotomy. Conservatives, under the modern usage that we use it, how we use it, are all supposed to be for personal responsibility, right? Well, making drugs illegal says, you people are too stupid and weak to take care of yourselves. So the government has to take care of you. It's a disconnect, and that's why, and if you've ever heard me say anything, you've heard me say this, left versus right is not important. It's the state versus the individual that is important. And that's why I think that Milton and Buckley and me and a lot of others in this room can see that distinction. Drug warriors don't want people to have that freedom to make those choices. They don't believe in it. Freedom is dangerous, live dangerously. That's on my blog, so remember that, bluecarp.com. And follow me on Twitter @bluecarp and Facebook. Again, Milton, he's got all kinds of great quotes. He was a prolific writer, and he was on TV, and he was on Phil Donahue and all kinds of media, which, thanks to YouTube, you can look up easily. He said, concentrated power is not rendered harmless by the good intentions of those who create it. And that goes back to the idea that drug warriors want to do good. They want people not to be on drugs. We all want that. But it's a question of what is the most effective way to get there. And quite often you see it with the left and the right, again, using the modern usage because I don't think that's important. Usually the conservatives use that argument against the progressives. It's like, hey, the war on poverty. Your guys are trying to help people out. We know you had good intentions, but did you make the problem better at all? There's an argument we can make that is worse. But you had good intentions. But that doesn't excuse the results. It's the same thing with the war on drugs. The idea goes, drugs are bad, therefore they must be illegal. And that's the end of the analysis. Well, that's usually what the conservatives criticize the progressives for doing. We have to stop poverty, let's give people more money. And that's the end of the analysis. On this topic, Milton said, on this issue, the only relevant test of the validity of the hypothesis is comparison of prediction with experience. I think that pretty much speaks for itself. Drugs are still a problem, despite the massive amounts of money and government force that we have used. And something that's very important, I think, for the modern day, us right here. Milton said, every friend of freedom, and I like to think everybody in this room is one of those, every friend of freedom must be as revolted as I am by the prospect of turning the United States into an armed camp, by the vision of jails filled with casual drug users, and of an army of enforcers empowered to invade the liberty of citizens on slight evidence. I'm sure you can all remember instances in the news of the police with armed with arms and dogs and armored vehicles busting in to break up some drug dealer. But they had the wrong address. And sometimes people die. Sometimes their pets die. And that, I think, is exactly what Milton was concerned about. One of the things. And we've seen it come to truth. Now, I believe that the drug war has been the single biggest assault on our Fourth Amendment protections, followed closely by the war on terror. And another thing that the drug war does is, things we've talked about, it provides a perverse incentive for aggressive marketing to people that otherwise might not ever try the drugs. Milton pointed out, it is inevitable that some relatively low-paid police and other government officials, and some high-paid ones as well, will succumb to the temptation to pick up easy money. Absolutely right again. Absolutely right, because it's illegal. That temptation is created, and that result is created. Now, that brings me to a quote from someone else famous, H.L. Mencken. And he said, and I think it's relevant to this topic, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. Got the drug war, the war on terror, the war on poverty for that matter. Any number of wars are out there created so people get scared and they turn to a benevolent protector. And it works. That's why they do it. But if we can spread this message, everybody in this room can help spread that message that freedom works, more and more people will hear that. And Milton wasn't talking about the drug war, but again, this quote applies. Many people want the government to protect the consumer. A much more urgent problem is to protect the consumer from the government. Again, we talk about these people that are barged in on when they have the wrong address. And I've never told this story before, but I had an internship in college with, I'll just say, a Northeastern police department. And I was riding along with one of the officers. And he found a guy who was selling some crack. He arrested him. The guy also had some marijuana on his body. Well, the cop threw away the marijuana. He didn't care. The crack is what the real problem was here. We got back to the station, where the guy was being booked, and the other cop who was there with him saw him writing up what he had, and he said, well, you got the crack cocaine there, but what about the marijuana? And he said, oh, I threw that away. But that's all right. He reached into his pocket and had some more, and he put it into evidence. Why do you think he was carrying that around? Yeah.
For that reason.
Exactly. Or to put it on somebody who didn't have anything.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to force being applied. Government protection doesn't work out the way the good intentions want them to work. Now, you've heard about these, like I said, the law enforcement breaking down doors. The drug war has been used now for over 40 years to justify encroachments on our natural rights. Now, we all agree, like I first started off with, that drugs are bad. So what can we do? This is where Milton, I think, really throws out the challenge. He said, in drugs, as in other areas, persuasion and example are likely to be far more effective than the use of force to shape others in our image. Persuasion and example? You gotta be kidding me, Milton, that's hard. Persuade people? If we ask them, they can say no. You want us to live a way that other people can emulate? That's hard. It's much easier to pass a law and put them in jail if they don't. So let's take Milton's advice, or his admonition. Persuasion and example. And that applies to any policy where somebody says, well, there ought to be a law and government should make people do that. Any of them. There's an alternative to police force, and all state action is police force. And that's persuasion and example. And I'll close with this. Milton wrote an article for Newsweek as dated May 1st, 1972. And this is how he opened. It's a couple paragraphs. The reign of tears is over. The slums will be only a memory. We will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk up right now, women will smile, and the children will laugh. Hell will be forever for rent. That was Billy Sunday, a noted evangelist and leading crusader against demon Rome. That's how he greeted the onset of Prohibition in early 1920. We now know how tragically his hopes were doomed. New prisons and jails had to be built to house the criminals spawned by converting the drinking of spirits into a crime against the state. Prohibition undermined respect for the law, corrupted the minions of the law, created a decadent moral climate, but did not stop the consumption of alcohol. Despite this tragic object lesson, we seem bent on repeating precisely the same mistake in the handling of drugs. Happy birthday, Milton.